Hello and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Sports. My name is Michael Rasile. This is the show where we get to talk about sports, we get to talk about business, and we get to talk about everything in between. Wherever you're listening, however you're listening, you know exactly what to do. 5-star review on Spotify, like and subscribe on YouTube, and say something really nice about me and my incredible guest over on Apple Podcasts. Today I have Kathleen Francis. She's the chair and president at Women in Sports Events, known as WISE. Kathleen, how you doing today? It's a great day to be alive, Kathleen. It is a great day to be alive. Shout out Marlon for setting this one up. He is my man as always. Kathleen, obviously I want to talk about WISE. You spent an incredible amount of time at the MLB. Maybe the reason they're going downhill is because you're not there anymore. We'll get to that. Don't worry. You spent some time with UTSA, but the first question I have for everybody on the For the Love of Sports podcast, Kathleen, is why do you love sports so much?
I grew up with it. I grew up with four brothers. I have a younger sister. And it's interesting that the girls both work in sports and the boys do not. But we grew up on a college campus and we just had the run of the place. So sports was just, our escape. And I just love it.
That is all. Which college campus were you growing up on?
It's a HBCU in New Orleans, Xavier University of Louisiana. And full transparency, my father was the university president. So we had full run of the campus, but with guardrails.
I'm sure everyone knew whose kids those were. Hey, just keep eyes on Kathleen. Yeah, let her shoot hoops. Just keep eyes on her. That's all. Like, please, I got stuff to do. That is awesome. I mean, that's such an interesting, unique experience. I mean, obviously, you can't really compare it to anything else because you grew up there. But just, I mean, the vibrancy of a college campus, right? Like, there is nothing like being on a college campus. I'm sure that helped not only get you into sports, but really just kind of helped you get going in life a little bit, right?
Yeah, I talk about the fact that I talk about this notion of the privilege of exposure. And I think that growing up on that college campus, doing the civil rights movement, that sense of oasis, that sense of safety and community, that you could be free and be kids and know that you had that safety net around you. And the exposure to so many different people from so many different walks of life really does set your framing, right? And what you can do and the sports. You're doing a podcast on it. You talk to people every day. What sports provide for people in that sense of building confidence and winning and losing and collaboration, teamwork, all of that stuff. It just kind of all of that rolls up to define who is sitting on this podcast with you today.
I love it. And you're sitting on this podcast with me today, so I'm excited to ask you some questions. But, you bring up a really awesome point. Like, one of my favorite things, so I went to Rutgers University up here in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Yeah, what's up? Which one did you go to?
I went to business school in Newark.
Nice. Okay, so I went to business school in New Brunswick. So I had an absolute blast there. It was an incredible time. Shout out to all the people that I met along the way. And one of my favorite things I always said was, so I grew up in a relatively white community, I guess is the easiest way to say it. Not too much diversity. A lot of great people here, but really not too much diversity. And one of my favorite things was when I went to Rutgers, I could literally walk through campus and hear like 4 or 5 different languages just from my way from the cafeteria or wherever I was to the class that I was going to, because there were so many international students and there was just nothing like that experience that I've had in the past. And it was just so cool being there for those 2 years when I was, to really be able to kind of feel that. And it sounds like you got to grow up with something, maybe not exactly the same, but something very similar, where college kids, man, there's something about them. They see the world in a completely different light. Once you get out, you start to like, okay, maybe there was some rose-colored glasses there. There's just something about college kids, man. You gotta love it.
Look, there was diversity on the campus, because of the pharmacy school there, but also diversity in the administration, in the faculty, and that international diversity. So you really just got the exposure. And then obviously going to Rutgers Newark, we did try to take a couple of classes in New Brunswick, but it was night classes, so I kind of kill those.
I won't tell anyone. Don't worry. If you don't tell anyone that I skipped a couple classes too, I won't tell anyone. Don't you worry there. But no, I love it, Kathleen. And so I guess as you said, you kind of grew up with sports. You were always on campus. You were always doing something. You kind of, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but it sounds like the coaches were a little bit of a babysitter once or twice. Not a big deal. What was it like when you decided, like, hey, like, not only do I want to play sports, obviously, but when that's over, I want to work in sports, especially as a woman. Like what, I don't want to say like it wasn't heard of back then, but what was it like kind of making that decision?
Michael, it kind of was unheard of back then, right? And honestly, I didn't make the decision until graduate school. And I actually had a friend, Leslie Billinger, was working for Coca-Cola in the events group. At least that's how I remember it, right? And when I left college, I moved from New Orleans to Hartford, Connecticut, which was a very different environment, you know, not the least of which was the weather. I had a cousin who worked at Yale, so I spent a lot of time going to New Haven from Hartford. And I went to corporate, which was a great experience, right? So growing up playing sports, pretty much played all sports, but organized wise, it was softball and a little bit of basketball and tennis. And I taught tennis, and then I thought I was doing pretty well, and maybe I would continue doing that, not as a professional, never contemplated that. But my parents said I needed to get a real job, right? So that was the first thing, right? So I moved to Hartford, Connecticut to work for Aetna in recruiting. And it was I look back on it now, and that experience, you talk about, again, exposure, it opened my eyes up to all of corporate, particularly if you're coming in through a human resources department and your internal clients are the organization. And you're a strategic partner trying to help them fill jobs and think about what they're going to need as the business evolves and all of that. And so what I realized is that I didn't want to live in Hartford, nothing against anyone who's from Connecticut and Hartford, but I just didn't want to live there. And I didn't really want to be in the human resources function, even though it was an unbelievable experience. And we'll talk about this later, but when you think about what I was doing there, one of my internal clients was the Aetna Institute. And the Aetna Institute was a place that everybody went to be trained. So if you went from being an individual contributor to a manager, they sent you across the street to be trained. And my 20-something-year-old self was saying, I got one person reporting to me, how bad can it be? Until you go to the training and you realize, it could be pretty bad. I don't think I would have done it that way, right? And you realize that in those instances, you're the talent. And they're training you, and they see potential in you, and they're trying to make sure you have everything you need around you to be successful, because that pays out for them, right? So that was their thinking. But I just didn't want to be there, and I thought the best way to transition was to go to graduate school, and that's how I ended up in New Jersey. I had family here in this area, and I came to New Jersey and went to Rutgers. And at that time, one of my friends, as I mentioned, from college was at Coca-Cola, and I was in the events, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I started thinking about, you started hearing more about sports as a possibility. But I will tell you that the counselor said to me, you should go. At the time, it was Warner Lambert, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, all that, Route 1. That group.
Yep.
And you need to go interview with them. They're here in town. I'm like, I don't think I want to do that. And they go, and she literally said to me, women don't work in sports. You need to go interview with the group. And I wasn't sure if she was right, but I was stubborn enough to believe that she was wrong, right? And to think that she would be wrong. And then I ended up working in between my first and second year, I started working at Equitable in their sports promotion area, where they had the Old Timer Series for baseball, and they had the Equitable Family Tennis Challenge. And I stepped in to manage the tennis challenge for someone who was out on maternity leave. And then they just sort of kept me through my second year of grad school and then postgraduate.
And what was it like kind of coming into, like, as you said, it was a woman who told you women don't work in sports. You, as you said, you're stubborn enough to not believe her. What was it like when you get into that situation and you kind of are like, oh, wait, like, maybe the one woman here, I'm replacing her because she's on maternity leave right now. Like, what is that mindset you're stepping into and kind of seeing this extremely male-dominated world where you can love sports too? Like, you're a smart girl. Like, why can't you also work here? What's the problem?
Yeah, look, at Equitable, it was still corporate, right? And the clients that, the agencies that worked with us to put on men, but there were a lot of women who worked at the agency, and there were some women in the corporate setting head of corporate communications and all were women. So I was still surrounded by women, but yes, it was still more men on that in the business world. I think what I don't even, if I look back on it now, Michael, I'm not even sure I thought that much about it. You know, in that age, you just think old people don't know what they're talking about, right? So
I still
I'm
think that. So
like, right. Now that I'm older, I think, well, no, we do. Um, but you know, I don't think I was so conscious of being maybe one of a few at the time. Certainly on the corporate side, I didn't see that. When I eventually went over to baseball, you know, Equitable pulled out of all of its sports programs. You know, back in the day, if the CEO was a fan of something, you know, you didn't have to worry about valuations and, you know, measurements and all of that. And in theory, we probably should have been doing more of that, you know, on the family tennis side because of the numbers of people, you know, small businesses, the agent, independent agents were writing business based on this really unique program that Equitable had developed. But I went over to baseball a little bit after that. And when came into baseball, I was actually interviewed by Marla Miller, who had worked at the NFL and was now at baseball. And she was interviewing to replace herself because she was going to be running the events, special events for baseball. She just recently retired last year or a year or so ago. And a lot of the women were in the merchandising space, right? And they came from probably backgrounds in merchandising, and the licensing business was hot. Baseball had taken it over from collegiate licensing, and there was a woman who was running trading card business where you were just sort of printing money at the time. And they had apparel, home goods, HABA brands, health and beauty aid brands, all of that. So you didn't feel so out of place in that sense because you had all these women. I came in on the corporate sponsorship side, but there weren't a lot of women of color when I came in and at the level that I was. You saw some in the administrative ranks, but not at the level that I was. And that's when you started to notice a little bit more distinction. And I was probably getting a little bit older, a little more maturity behind me. You know, pay attention to what your surroundings a little bit more.
Yeah, I didn't quite start doing that till I was like 27-ish. So yeah, I can
Yeah, that's about
understand.
right.
Yeah, around 27, I'm like, you know, I should probably see what's going on. Maybe not just be completely in my brain all the time. And I think it's an interesting, right? As you said, like there were very few women in sports at the time, but you were still lucky enough to be able to surround yourself with a few of them, especially in a very interesting time period, as you said, in baseball, where in some places they're just printing money, right? The 90s, man, like with the home run chases and everything that was going on, like it was that was peak baseball, right? And that was so incredible. How did you not only just surround yourself with women, right? But like, did you do anything? Did you do any outreach? Did you do anything proactively to be like, hey, what did you do? How did you get better? What are some of the challenges that you're facing that maybe I might face so I can potentially, you know, navigate these waters just a little easier?
Look, I think having the corporate experience helped me. I came in with a little bit more confidence, but I also, you know, having a Marla, having a Mary, having a Deidre Verona had been there in an administrative function. And so, you know, I tell people all the time, you know, don't overlook anybody because folks who are in administrative roles, and Deidre ended up elevating into the international licensing group, but at the time she knew a lot, right? And I was fortunate to have people like, you know, like who I've mentioned. Wendy Lewis came along, had been working at the Chicago Cubs, who you could just reach out to and say, hey, look, I'm not sure how to navigate this situation, right? And I always felt comfortable enough to do that. So I found myself really fortunate to have that support system, and it just sort of continued to grow. And then, you know, what was interesting, there were a group of people of color, and mostly African Americans from the various leagues. At one point, they got together a few times just to get to know each other and to, you know, feel that sense of community, you know, that because as a woman, you face certain things. As a woman of color, you face a certain thing. As a black woman, you face a certain thing, and they're not all the same. They're degrees of, and so having that broader scope was helpful to me to know that I could just ring up somebody and go, what's this?
Love it.
Right. So that was special.
That is awesome. That is, it's, I think networking, community, like those are some things that just like doesn't matter if it's the 90s or if, what, 2024, right? All those things are extremely important, and have been and will continue to be, if not so more important moving forward, just because of the stories, the experiences, everything that you've dealt with. You can now share that with other people, right? And hopefully they don't have to go through exactly the same things. That, at the same time, they made you who you are, and hopefully, their experiences will make them who they are. I think I said that right. It was very profound when I was thinking of it. Just didn't quite get it out that well.
It
But
was incredibly profound, I will tell you.
thank you. I appreciate that, Kathleen. No, but I think it's really important, and it sounds like you had a very good time. You were at the MLB, what, over a decade, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, 11 years.
Little over a decade. That's incredible. Shout out.
Yeah.
And now look, they're just going downhill. Surprise, surprise, right?
Yeah, I think they beg to differ, but
Ah,
yeah. Look, it was a great experience. Even the good and the bad, right? I mean, because
of
you got to
course.
learn from things, and you also have to own um, some of the challenges. That it isn't always. We always like to point the finger, but we have to own where we were in our career and what we were doing. And I think for me, um, baseball wasn't on the top of my list to go to, right? I thought maybe, given what I'd done at Equitable and tennis and when I grew up playing tennis and all that, maybe I might go work. I think Kraft was sponsoring the women's tour at the time, and I was talking to them and seeing what the opportunities might be there, the WTA, or with one of the sponsor brands. But going to baseball turned out to be a great experience because it wasn't a large organization, not like it is today. Right. The commissioner's office and the properties division, maybe we had 300 or so people in it at the time. And so you got to touch a lot of different things. And you weren't necessarily, you could argue you were a little bit of a specialist. So I was doing, sponsor activation and a little bit of selling. But at the end of the day, I went from there to market development and to marketing, and still touching and interacting and being able to work on some great projects. The All Century team back in 1999, as the sort of Field of Dreams when we announced them at in Boston at Fenway. Um, Jackie Robinson's the retiring of his number, and Hank Aaron, who right after Jackie, we celebrated him breaking the record, the home run record. So for me, being able to touch those things and in many cases lead some of them, but collaborate and be involved with them. My father was a huge baseball fan, and my father to this day follows the Dodgers. He turns 93 on the 20th of this month. And if the Dodgers, and he lives in New Orleans, and if the Dodgers are playing, if the game starts at 9 o'clock in New Orleans, he's going to watch it till the end. And it might be 2 in the morning. It might be he's gonna watch. But Jackie Robinson was his guy.
hmm
So to be able to tell him and to show him what role I played in the retiring of his number and the celebrating the 50th anniversary is pretty. It's a pretty special thing that you can share with your father.
Absolutely. That sounds amazing. Yeah, having that the opportunity to work on so many incredible events that are near and dear to your heart, but then to see something like that with your dad, where it's all these years later, he's still a huge Dodgers fan. Like, I stopped listening to Dodgers games when Vince Scully retired because, there's nothing like Vince Scully calling a baseball game. I also had to start waking up for work, so I think that's a big reason.
Yeah.
You can't watch a baseball game till 1 a.m. if you're waking up at 6:30 to go to work the next day. But no, I think it's awesome. Good for your dad. I think that's so cool. And yeah, as you said, to be able to share that with him, not just that one time, but it's every year, right? Every year we have, Jackie Robinson Day, which is so cool. And, I'm sure you guys get to share that moment together too, which is really awesome.
Yeah, it is. It is pretty special. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So you did eventually, after MLB, you did end up a little bit in tennis, correct? With the USTA?
Yeah, I did a pit stop at the Meadowlands Sports Complex.
Pit stop. I like that.
And that was fascinating too because you came from the other side, right? I had never worked at a team, and now I was coming to work for the landlord. So I worked for the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority, right, and the landlord of what was then Giant Stadium, Continental Airlines Arena. They had a couple of racetracks, the one there down at then Monmouth Park, and the convention center further down, the Jersey, of course, Jersey Shore. And now you're interacting with the teams much more closely. You're doing family shows, entertainment. I mean, there was one year, I think we had over 221 events on the grounds, and I don't think I was counting all of the racing nights because,
Woof.
the trotters, which I learned later, the trotters will run in a blackout or whiteout, right? A lot of the Canadians who are in the harness racing business, and as they come around the back side of the track, you can't see them. So I have no idea how they're calling the race, and you just hear them calling the race, and like, who is how do you know? And as they come around across the line, you see them, they're all covered in mud and snow and whatnot. But that was an awesome experience because you got every type of event, circus to football, basketball, two football teams, basketball team, college basketball, hockey, you name it. Springsteen doing 11 shows, stadium shows.
All 8 hours long, too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. But it was really, really an awesome group of people. That's where I gained a greater respect for people on the operations side of the business. That event, stadium, facility operators. In that particular footprint, those facility operators were managing two venues, and there was a particular year where I believe we had some international football games, but the Devils and the Nets made it to the playoffs. And so every other night they were switching out the arena floor, and then they had international soccer happening at the stadium. And to sit in their suite, and Michael, one of the coolest things ever for me, and they got to be pretty funny because they started to just bring the popcorn in when I'd walk in. I'd come in, I'd knock on the door, like, can I come in? And they'd let me in, and I'd sit in the back row of the little suite, and they would just be calling. Lot 7 shut down, moving people over here, fight happening in 221. I'm trying to look and see where it's fight's happening, and all this thing. They're just calling it very chill, like family shows. I'd come up, watch family shows with them, but I was learning from them and appreciating what they had to do, because if we were in the marketing department and we're asking for some crazy stuff, might want to get to know just how crazy the stuff is we're asking for. But it became a great experience just to sit in there and to listen to them, where finally I stopped bringing my popcorn because they would just, I'd walk in, they go, popcorn's on the corner, your seat's right there, sit down, shut up, and watch us work.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's something about events, and like I think there's a huge disconnect between marketing, people selling the marketing for events, and the actual event management. Because it just happens, right? Like you're an event manager. I've worked events, and I've sold marketing for events. The disconnect is pretty major. So learning and seeing and understanding that, I'm sure those people, while I'm sure you still oversold it every once in a while because you got to make a dollar, right? It's still nice to know, right?
Yeah, I think the best one was when I don't think I sold this one, but I want to say it was Bubblicious. I could have it wrong, but I do know that Steinbrenner, because going to have bubble blowing contests, in the playoffs or something, and the championship series, and Steinbrenner's like, there will be no bubble blowing in Yankee Stadium. Like, but wait, we sold it to the anywhere, nowhere. But yeah, you had to really come to appreciate what they had to deal with, because they had to go to convince him. Yeah, it's already been sold, man. But,
sorry, man. What do you want us to do? Yeah, right. No, sorry to you. Sorry. Yeah. That's too funny. And I guess with that type of job as well, like connecting it back to women in sports, right? Like what was that like? As you said, like the experience on the event side, are there more women working on that side, or are there less women? Is it you and a bunch of people? Like how were you able to navigate those waters in respect to what you were able to do at MLB?
Well, you had an events division, right? And the person I started this off, Marla Miller, was running events at at baseball, and she had a team of people, and it was a good mix of men and women working in the team, and you needed to collaborate with them. You know, one of my favorite moments was the Jackie Robinson 50th anniversary that took place at then Shea Stadium. And I remember driving, I was driving into work. I was living in New Jersey at the time. And I was driving into work, and I was listening to the CD, randomly listening to the CD from the Atlanta Olympic Games, where Tevin Campbell, so if you ever get a chance to go back and listen, Tevin Campbell is singing The Impossible Dream, right? And I think it became sort of like the theme song or whatever that they used. And I come into the office and I say to, I think it was Carolyn Taylor, who was in events, I said, man, I just heard the best song. I mean, that could be awesome for Jackie Robinson. But it was almost like a throwaway line to her, like, man, that'd be something we could get him to sing that, you know. And then I just sort of walk off, right? And the Mets, Mark, who was the head of marketing for the Mets, you know, they were going to do a video compilation of Jackie, and they said, well, let's just theme it to that music, right? And I don't even remember how that conversation, how they found out that Carol, and obviously she said something, or we said something in a meeting after that. After that, was just a bit of a blur to me. And then Carolyn comes to my office one day. She says, hey, we got Tevin Campbell. He's going to sing the song live. And I'm like, excuse me, what?
That's awesome.
What's happening? And you can pull it up on YouTube now, that you can see he walks out there. And, you know, there's a lot of backstory about people calling and yelling at me because they said, how could you possibly use that song? You know, the man from La Manche was a crazy man. I'm like, but we're not singing about him. We're singing about Jackie. But if you pull it up on YouTube one day, you hear it. People thought Tevin was lip syncing. And he sang it live to a back, you know, track. And on the screen is the video that the Mets had someone put together. And it was one of the most powerful moments when I think back on, you know, think about those special moments, you know, that walking with Hank Aaron and his, but that particular moment, because Rachel Robinson was there to experience it. And the next day when she reached out, that's when you know you've done something good. You know, you think, well, I don't need to do anything else now. I get the rest of the month off, right? This is great. But that was pretty special. But it all came down to a group of people coming together to play their role. Like, yeah, sure, you can have an idea, but Carolyn made it happen. The Mets kind of brought it together. Now it's the best thing you can do is just stay out of the way. Don't screw it up at that point. Yeah, it was pretty special.
That's incredible. I love that. That's such an awesome story. I'm very grateful. Thank you for telling us that. I can't wait. I'll find the YouTube clip. I'll throw it in the show notes for everybody. How about that? So they can go and find it, and it's right there for them, so they can check it out. Very excited. And so I know we have a couple minutes left here, but obviously I do want to touch upon WISE, Women in Sports and Events. You are the chair and president of this organization. Spend a lot of time doing this, so appreciate you for that. I guess tell me a little bit about kind of what you got. Like, I don't want to be super general, but like, what do you do? How do you help? Who are you helping? Like, where does this organization come from? Give us a little bit of the juice around it.
Yeah, I think when you go back to the baseball time, and you know, when Sue and a couple of other founders got a group of women Rolodex days together to talk about, was there a need for an organization? Sue had some challenges as a small sports marketing agency, and when she looked around, she didn't feel as though she had that network that she could, like you talked about earlier, to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, have you had the same experience, right? And so a group of them got folks together, Ernestine Miller, I think Sylvia Allen, Sue, and someone else, and 60 of us showed up, not knowing why we were going, to Mickey Mantle's on Central Park South. And out of that, the notion of WISE was formed, and it was formed really, as we describe it now, it's around empowering women to succeed in the business and surrounding them with the resources. And at the time, it was just networking and mentorship. When Sue handed it off, you began, I think in 93, 94 is when we looked at having the Woman of the Year, which we will celebrate next week. As a way to inspire and to show other women that women were succeeding in the business. We've gotten even more intentional about that award, that making sure that women are succeeding and also helping other women to succeed, so leaving the ladder down so that others can climb forward. And I like to say that if you look at us and the pillars that we're doing, there are events that inspire, so the Women of the Year. There's learning that transforms. So all of a sudden now that the talent that I benefited from and training that I benefited from back in my Aetna days, bringing that to women to say, you are the talent and we want to make sure you have what you need to excel in your organizations. And then it's relationships that matter. And some of those things collide, so when you go through our executive, leadership institute at Tuck, that cohort of women come out as a very tight unit. And now we have had 9 or 10 of got an emerging leaders program, so that helps women build their strategic and financial acumen earlier in their career so they can accelerate. So it really is around helping to catalyze the acceleration of so that we see and continue to see, more women becoming presidents of teams, operating agencies. We see it now. We see more than we saw when I was coming into the industry, but we need to see more, and how we can. We're never about, hey, we got to fix women. No, women want to see opportunities to develop, and so we're looking to do that. But we also want to see, how do we change the culture of the industry so that everyone can see themselves and feel included and feel that sense of belonging.
Well, I got to ask, how do you change the culture of the industry then? That's a tall task, don't you think?
It's a really tall and ambitious task, but I think it is. There are partners. You can't even say allies anymore, and there are male partners out to support and mentor together. Then the better we'll all be.
Completely agreed. I think more diversity, more experiences leads to better ideas, right? You get a bunch of people that look exactly the same from the same backgrounds. The ideas aren't going to be as interesting or diverse. You got to get a lot of different people in a room and hear and think and understand where they're coming from, because there's a lot of different people out in the world, and you're trying to get in front of a lot of them, right? As sports fans, NFL had 125 million people watch the Super Bowl. Right. The pie chart is probably pretty interesting on the number of people and what they look like, right? So
right, and they talk about, Marianne Turk talks about the intimacy of that, and creating that intimacy and understanding the uniqueness of the fan in that sense. But you first have to believe that it matters, right? Because if you don't believe that having diversity, and not just people got to go diversity of thought, because we think differently. But why do we think differently? Right? We think differently because of where we come from, and if we all go to the same Ivy League school, then we might still think a little different. But do we truly understand someone that didn't go to an Ivy League school, and what their socioeconomic situation might be, and how that's going to advance, and how do they engage with the game, right? And we had an example where we were looking to do a campaign on authentic gear, and they had a lot of replica gear. And when you put it in a room, and you had people bring, we had focus groups, we had people bring in what they thought was their authentic gear, and then we hung up gear around the room, and it left the hang tags on that said authentic replica. People walked around, they looked at their stuff, and they said, mine's authentic. And we went back and said, no, yours isn't. Yours is not. Yours is a replica. And they literally said, they actually got mad at us. They go, don't tell me mine isn't authentic. It is the logo that they wear on the field. They didn't care that it wasn't the exact jersey manufacturer that was worn on the field in this particular focus group. And so we had to be really particular about how you described authentic merchandise versus replica, because you couldn't say, if you're not wearing authentic, you're not a true fan, right? But it was understanding the diversity of how people engage with the product. And you can, that just extends to everything you just said too. It's making sure that voices are around the table. Look, without women, around the table, we wouldn't have all this product that is silhouetted for women.
Hmm.
We'd still be walking around with the big cone head on field hat from baseball that no woman wants to wear, right? We've got a soft sided hat, we've got jerseys that are in the silhouette of women. That was from voices of women saying, there's an audience for this. I'm the audience for this. And so those little examples, it's always baked in return on investment, right? It's always baked in bottom line, from Jackie Robinson coming into the game to how we, advertise, where we stream, where we engage now with these kind of conversations. But that's because we've got different voices around the table, and we've got to continue to do that. And WISE is doing our best to make sure that women are prepared for the opportunity that's before them.
And see, you kind of have the superpower already, right? Because you know the math. As long as the math works out, they'll do it, right? So just yeah, make it feel like it was their idea, right? That old adage is like, if you make it feel like it was their idea, they're gonna want to do it more. So if you just show them the math that
so
says,
easy, Michael.
right? Yes, it's simple. You're take it. You can have this one.
That's Rutgers math.
That's that New Jersey math, baby. I love it. But no, sincerely, like I think it's so important for people to just to like kind of just listen to that again, right? Like the only reason this stuff exists was because women needed to be at the table. Well, like who's the idiot sitting there not being like, 50% of the country, maybe they want a Dodgers hat. just throwing it out there, right? So it's frustrating that it had to get to that point, but at least we did get to that point, thankfully. And then now, as you said, like now we understand it's the ROI. Can we get ROI from it? So if you can present everything in an ROI, ROAS, whatever term you want to use, fashion, most likely going to happen, because that's all we care about these days is money, unfortunately. Yeah. But I do think it's very important what you guys are doing at WISE, because all we need to do, not all we need to do, that's a silly way to say it, but one of the things that needs to be done is just get more women into the sports industry, right? Like I see it. I've worked at multiple companies. I've seen women across all of these companies, which I think is awesome. The ratio isn't exactly, 1-to-1, obviously, but at the same time, I see them everywhere. I'm on teams with them. I'm in meetings with them. And I think it's always important. It's always nice to just kind of see that it's not just a bunch of dudes talking about sports, right? Like there's some dudes and some ladies in there, and we're all talking about sports. And again, I think that's important from an experience perspective. And the more and more women we get into sports, the higher and higher up they'll go, and the more diversity and opportunity there will be for everybody, which I think will only make, just in general, sports, I work in sports betting, all these companies, only positive things will come from something like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, sports betting, FanDuel's got a woman running, Amy Howe.
Amy Howe, she's incredible. Just connected with her on LinkedIn. Shout out Amy if you see this.
Yeah, Amy is absolutely incredible. And there are a lot of women working in sport. I think we have to recognize that it's not just one woman at the table. And it's still, unfortunately, it's still one, maybe two in big meetings at times. Hillary Mandel, who's negotiating some of the biggest deals out there, rights holder deals. She's still one of two women she and Karen Brotkin will be in a room negotiating billions of dollars, right? Making sure that the opportunities still exist, because the voices and the talent, you want to get all the best talent coming in, and it's not just coming from one gender. Right, so we gotta continue to push.
I love it. We're gonna lean on you for that. I hope that's okay. One more time, this has been incredible. Kathleen Francis, Chair and President over at Women in Sports and Events. Where can we learn a little bit more about the organization? Where can we learn a little bit more about you? Give us some links. I'll put everything in the show notes for everyone.
Yeah, look, we've got a LinkedIn page. We've got wiseworks.org. And we've got our social Instagram, and our 25 chapters around the country. So hopefully, if you're not here in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, LA, or even Toronto, a lot of women, a lot of great volunteers doing some great work for not just themselves. It's very beneficial to be a part of this, people that I've met, but for the industry. So everything they're doing is having an impact on the industry and the community at large. So I'm excited about the work that we're all able to collaborate on and do. And it's been great having this conversation with a Rutgers alum. This is awesome,
Rutgers.
Michael.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. The pleasure is all mine. And thank you for your time. Time's the only thing we don't get more of. So I appreciate you for that. And I appreciate the audience giving us some of theirs. But other than that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Bye, everybody.
Night.